Okay guys, so hi, welcome to today's lunchtime lesson. So today we're going to be talking about giving opinions, okay? So we're going to do a little focus on language we can use for giving opinions. We're going to think about quick and easy ways to improve the language you're probably already using. And I'm going to show you the way to give a really nicely constructed answer if you're planning to present to any of the Cambridge or the IELTS exams, okay? So we're going to think about how we can shape a good answer when you're giving an opinion. So giving opinions, agreeing and disagreeing with those opinions is one of the most common kinds of functional language that we're going to get asked to produce, okay? We, of course, use it in a day-to-day situation, but I would say that the language that we use in real life is very different to the language that students quite often produce. So we're going to have a little think about that as well. So first of all, I want to see how much you know. So take a piece of paper and a pen if you want to be old school, or take a Google Doc or something if you want to be new school, if you want to be modern. And what I'm going to get you to do, guys, is I'm going to give you 1 minute. And in that minute, I'd like you to write down as many ways that you can think of to give an opinion, to agree, and to disagree, right? So if I give you one for free, a way to give an opinion would be as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. Okay. So see if you can think of some more ways to do that. So 1 minute starts now. Okay, and I'm going to stop you there. All right, so think about how many you managed to write up there. Yeah, did you have a nice selection? You got like 4 or 5, seeing some people put hands in the box there. Yeah, 7, 8, okay, nice. 5, 6. Okay, did anyone write these ones? In my opinion, I agree and I disagree. Were those on your list? Okay, if they were, please cross them out. So if you wrote any of those 3, I'd like you to cross them out. Because really, people do not use them, okay? And it's not only that people don't use them very much, it's that they are overused. That's the biggest problem for me, right? So I just hear them, and especially if we're thinking about exams, I used to examine for Cambridge exams, and it was all you used to hear every single time, all the time. In my opinion, in my opinion, in my opinion, I agree, I disagree. And it's very boring, okay? We're going to think of some much more interesting ways that we can express our opinions, agree and disagree with them, yeah? To make your language more interesting, to make your language a bit more natural, and if you're doing an exam, to make it more appealing, okay? To make it, to help you get bigger marks, okay? So let's just start with some basics, right? These are some ways that I get, that I tell students to do these 3 functions, to give opinions, agree and disagree. And I teach these expressions to my beginners quite often, yeah? Right? And these are just some great, nice, easy ways that you can express these things, but sound so much more better than, in my opinion, I agree and I disagree, which are the first ones we usually learn. So let's see if you chose any of these, okay? So for giving opinions, a great thing we can say is personally, yeah? So personally, I think it's important to go to university, okay? As far as I'm concerned is another great expression that you can use to give an opinion. Okay, so as far as I'm concerned, an education is really important. To be honest, this is a great one, right? My students always like this one. To be honest, I prefer reading to going to the cinema. Okay. And another one we can say, which is also really natural, very easy to use, well, actually, I think the cinema is more interesting. So to be honest and well, actually, these are, more or less the same thing here. And personally, and as far as I'm concerned, these are kind of synonymous of each other, all right? But there's 4 great ways and easy ways to give an opinion, which is not, in my opinion. Yeah. Right. In my experience, one more, guys. Okay. Remember, if you use this, you have to be talking about your experience. Okay. I can't say in my experience, living on the moon is incredible because I have never lived on the moon. Right. So it's got to be something that you can talk about. Okay. The same with agreeing and disagreeing. Here are some really simple ways that you can agree and disagree that I do not hear people use. Yes, of course. Okay. Yes, definitely, or yes, absolutely. And you can make even the word agree to say, I totally agree. Right, if I want to use some words in the middle here to agree and disagree, what I mean by that is if I want to disagree with you, but diplomatically or politely, okay, there's lots of nice expressions we could use, right? So I could say I'm not sure about something. I could say, I see what you mean. I acknowledge what you're saying, however, but this is what I feel. And I could say, I understand your point, but this is what I think. Okay. And if I completely disagree with you, right, I can use the opposite here. Definitely, absolutely not. Just watch out, right? So when it's positive, we can say yes. We say yes at the beginning. But when it's negative, we say not at the end. Okay. I could, again, like I totally agree, just add in an extra word to make it more interesting. I completely disagree. Or I can also say, I'm sorry, but I have to disagree. Right? So look at all of these brilliant ways, which are really very simple, but that I do not hear my students produce, right, to agree or disagree. Another thing that's important to say, guys, about especially disagreement in English, this is a cultural thing, okay? So you'll notice that here in that last one, Sarah, last example, I say, I'm sorry, but I have to disagree. We very often use an apology before we express disagreement in English. Yeah. And it's very common to use these kind of diplomatic ones in the middle to disagree with somebody rather than just coldly say no. Right. Okay. So it is a cultural thing because it can seem very confrontational for people to disagree with you, right, in English. So do be careful with that and just make sure that your intonation matches what people are saying. Because if you're having a conversation with someone and you say, no way, okay, that could come across as quite aggressive almost, right? So we quite often soften that kind of language with an apology, like I'm sorry, or using these kind of things like I acknowledge you, however, this is what I think. All right, so just think about that. The context obviously affects that, right? So it's one thing to be with your friend in the pub having a beer, arguing over who's the most interesting character in Star Wars, for example, and you would say, no way, you're wrong. And it's very different to be in a meeting at work and say to your boss, no way, okay, right? So, obviously the situation that we're using the language in and we're agreeing and disagreeing in is important too. Okay, so those are some basics, some very basic, simple ways that you can agree and disagree. I'm sure you all agree that it's not difficult to use, they're not complicated to use, okay? But it's just going to make your language so much more varied, yeah? Now, here are also some really easy ways that we can improve some of these basic functions that we have to express opinion, agreement, and disagreement, right? So let's look at giving an opinion first. So I'm going to show you some words, and I want you to think about what word you could add into the sentence to just make it a little bit more interesting. Okay, so let me give you an example, right? So if I've got that one there, the one I said, if you wrote in my opinion, cross it out, right? Here's two ways that you could just make that a little bit more interesting. Okay, you could add in the word honest, in my honest opinion, or you could add in my humble opinion. All right. We use in my humble opinion quite often slightly sarcastically, right? So it's like, well, in my humble opinion, I think that this is the best film that exists. Okay. Right. But if I just add in a word, it makes it so much more interesting. So just take a minute, guys, have a look at those other 4 words that I've put there and just think if there's anything that you could do, adding in a word or a couple of words to make it a more interesting sentence. Okay, so let me show you some ideas, okay? So in my experience, I could add in the word extensive or limited, right? So if I have a lot of experience, I would use extensive. If I don't, I would use limited. If I wanted to make it more negative, I could also say, well, I don't have much experience, okay, of this, but this is what I think. This one here, I think we could add in the word really, okay? And it just very quickly makes that a more interesting sentence. Or if I wanted to not be as, to show that I'm not so sure about something, right? I'm not sure, but I think. I'd say, put in the word definitely. I definitely say, or the word probably. Yeah, I'd probably say. And I believe, right? We could add in strongly believe or use it's generally believed. Now, one thing I would say about the word believe, I feel that's a more sort of formal tone, okay? So I personally wouldn't use this if I was talking, you know, how do you feel about this issue? I wouldn't say I believe. I would say, well, to be honest, I think. But if I was writing something, in English, I might use believe, okay? And especially in written English, this is where you'd see a structure like that one. It's generally believed, okay? So that's the kind of thing that works really nicely in essay writing, yeah? In another lesson, we're going to talk about giving opinions in writing, right? But today we are focusing on speaking. And again, I strongly believe, for example, if you were giving a presentation, that would work very nicely, but maybe not so much just for a kind of normal conversation. Okay, right, let's do the same with agreeing and disagreeing. So here's some really common ways to agree and disagree. Could you think of a word that you could add into those to just make them a little bit more interesting? We actually saw some examples already with I agree and I don't agree. Yeah. Good. So with I agree, a really nice one is I couldn't agree with you more. Okay. And I agree up to a point. Okay. The ones that we saw before, right, was I totally agree was another way that we could modify that to make it a little bit more interesting. You're right. You're absolutely right. Or you might be right. Yeah. I wouldn't say completely right because it's not a collocation. Yeah, I would say you're absolutely right about that. I feel the same way. I feel exactly the same way. I feel more or less the same way. I don't agree. I really don't agree. I don't really agree. Now, the position of that adverb there is actually very important because it really changes what we're saying. So if I say I really don't agree, it's like I emphatically disagree. Okay? But if I say I don't really agree, I don't totally agree. They're on different levels here. So where you put the word really is going to change your meaning. Yeah, I really don't agree. I strongly disagree. I don't really agree. I sort of disagree. Yeah. And then this one here, I see where you're coming from. This is this kind of diplomatic acknowledgement to disagree with someone. Yeah. So we've got lots of nice ways that we can say similar things to this. I can see what you're trying to say. I understand your point of view. And in all of these, we're going to contrast it. Okay. So if I use these, I disagree with what the speaker is saying, but I've softened it and I've made it less aggressive. Okay. coming to do an exam in English, this kind of language is really important because for two reasons. For your listening, it's actually important. Very often in the listening, you're asked to identify people's attitudes and feelings towards things. And the kind of language we've just looked at is very often used as the justification for the answer. So being familiar with these expressions is important for that. But also for your speaking exam, it's very important, especially in the final part of the test. So that means if you're doing an IELTS test, it'll be part 3. If you're doing a Cambridge test, it'll be part 4. And those parts of the exam are really the most important part of your speaking exam, right? Because that's the part where the examiner is asking you to produce the most authentic language. You're not so limited by a task. There, you're just asked to express how you feel about things. So it's your opportunity to show off your English at its very best. And also, the other reason it's important, guys, right? It's the last thing the examiner is going to remember. And that's what will be in their mind at the end of the exam. So it's really important that we can give good, well-rounded opinions in our answers. And the way to do that is what I call the three-prong approach. Okay, so the three aspects to that. So the first thing you want to do, guys, is you want to give your opinion. The second thing you want to do is explain that opinion. And then finally, what you want to do is expand that opinion. And what I mean by expanding it is illustrating it, right? So you can expand that with an example, you could expand that with a scenario, or you could expand that with a fact. Okay, so let me show you what that looks like. Yep, here's an example answer that I've put. So studying online is a better way to learn English. So the first step I'm going to do is give my opinion, and I will always open with my functional language, right? So a good thing to think about if you're doing an exam is think every time you open your mouth, it should begin with some kind of functional language, right? So I'm going to begin with this here to give my opinion, to be honest. Okay, to be honest, before having studied online, I'd have said no. But now I've done it in my limited experience, I would absolutely agree. Yeah. So I've actually used 3 pieces of lovely functional language in that answer. So that's my opinion, but now I'm going to explain why it's my opinion. Okay. So the reason that I agree with this is that the technology used in the lessons is an incredible tool to improve your learning and your level. And now I'm going to expand on that and I'm going to illustrate it. To illustrate this one, I'm going to use an example, right? So I'm going to say, for instance, my teacher records all of our classes, which means I can go back and rewatch them if I can't remember something, if I need some clarification, or even to listen to my speaking. Okay. Now, look at that answer. Isn't that a lovely, well-constructed answer that shows so much language? Okay. You've included lots of functional language for agreeing and disagreeing. And remember that the functional language you're using, as well as organizing your ideas and getting you a higher mark on your the way that you're presenting your information by giving a clear argument, it also contributes to your vocabulary mark as well. Okay, so if you're coming out with great expressions like to be honest, or in my limited experience, as well as helping express the function, it's going to improve your vocab mark too. Okay, so this is what we want to think about to make a nice rounded answer. All right, so sorry about the typo there, guys. That should say how much do you remember, not how much odd you remember. Right, so how much do you remember? Right, I'm going to give you another minute now, and I want you to see if you can write down as much language as you can from what we looked at today. So think about all the ways that we talked about giving opinions, agreeing and disagreeing, and also those expressions that we looked at by adding in an extra word or a few words that you can use. Okay, so take another minute and see if you can remember any of those. All right, so let's just quickly go through that again and see how many of these you managed to write down. So here are the ones that we had as the nice, simple ways to improve giving opinions. Here are the ways that we talked about agreeing and disagreeing. And here are the ways that we talked about quickly improving some of those very standard words that we're probably already using a lot, but by just bringing in an extra word or two, we can make so much more interesting. And here's agreeing and disagreeing. So please don't worry if you didn't write all of those. That was not the intention of what I wanted us to do again. I didn't expect anyone to memorize like 30 or 40 words or however many we looked at today. But that little exercise we just did there about getting you to write down what you remember, that did serve a purpose. Okay, so the purpose that served, if I just jump back to my last slide, the ones that you have remembered, those are really great ones for you to use because it means that you've retained them and they've stayed in your mind quite easily. Okay, so think about the ones that you did remember and that you wrote down and see if you can begin to incorporate those ones into your speaking. Okay, now can you remember the 3 ways we have to give a good part 3 or part 4 answer? The 3 steps I talked about? Yeah, take a second. You can write those down too. So if you remember, the first thing that we have to do is give an opinion, explain the opinion, and then expand the opinion. Okay, and we expand the opinion using an example, a scenario, or a fact. Okay. All right, so here's the challenge for you guys. The same way that I showed you that example answer before. Here's a question for you, right? So online shopping is much better than buying things in a physical shop. Do you agree? So using the language that we've looked at today and using those 3 steps, I want you to think about giving an answer, giving your opinion, right? Using interesting language and the 3 steps. So give an opinion, explain the opinion, expand the opinion. All right. So that's your little language challenge for you to try this week. Okay. And do try and use the words that you did write down, that you retained, that you've remembered well. Your other language challenge is to start to bring those into your speaking. Right, this week.